This is a real pleasure to be able to spend time with all of you today. And I know you're all data aficionados, along with Christian and myself, certainly for many, many years. Um, it's a really nice thing that Christian, you do here, putting these meetings on, and really appreciate it and appreciate being part of it. And so today, what I'd like to do is sort of to stretch you guys and look sort of outside the box. I have this suspicion that we as data professionals sort of live in our own silo and we don't even realize it. So the larger message of what I'm going to present today is, hey, let's look outside the silo, because in the knowledge age, there are a lot of very important things that we need to be doing, could be doing, and could really help our organizations doing. So let me figure out how to advance my screen. There we go. Now, I know for you guys, I don't have to talk too much about poor data quality and all the problems that it causes. It's pretty apparent to everybody, but just for a reminder, here is a short list of some of the effects of poor data quality. And I'll just briefly mention the third item because there's some real irony here in that poor data quality weakens decision makings in the organization. You know, and companies are spending huge sums of money today on their business intelligence and data analytics and data architecture platforming. And that probably includes your company as well. But if your management loses faith in the data, because of data quality issues, what's going to happen? Managers, decision makers are going to fall back on their own intuition, and that undercuts the whole investment that companies are making in trying to be data driven. In the era of big data, do we really want decision makers falling back on gut feel? You know, I don't think so, and I don't think that's the direction most companies want to go these days. So there are even more dangers on the list, and I'm sure you could add your own to these. But I'll just mention your company's digital strategy. Um, your digital strategy is not going to be any better than the quality of the data you can supply it. And I don't want to oversimplify the issue of digital, of course, but here's what I see. And one important point worth noting, and probably some of you are facing some of these same issues. One aspect of a digital strategy is to connect in customers and other outside parties directly to our products and services. In other words, what you're doing is you're taking your company's workers out of the loop. Now, by doing that, you may be exposing your dirty laundry. In many cases, those very same workers would have been able, in the past, to correct problems in line with the customer. No damage done, but not anymore. Now, you might argue that it's IT's misuse or non-use of appropriate business terminology. It's not really a problem, but I disagree strongly for two basic reasons. First, nowadays, cryptic IT terminology, as I suggested, is showing up in customer-facing apps, leading to huge frustration. And I can speak to that personally, as well as I know many of you can. And with digital moving so fast, that's only going to be happening more and more. Second, why would business managers and business analysts and data professionals want to complicate their own conversations with IT? It makes no sense to me. Aren't we in business to do the business? So whose fault is it? Well, you can blame IT if you like. That's the easy answer. But I'm here to say today, it's not really their fault. What in their job description says that they need to be business vocabulary specialists? Well, who then? Data architects and data specialists? Well, honestly, Can you think of anybody better placed to deal with this kind of problem? I can't. So what's going to fix the problem of poor data quality? Here's a couple of things that aren't going to fix it. First, we have to accept there are no silver bullets. There are no magic cures to this problem. The problem is just too deep, and in spite of all the wonderful array of tools coming out these days, not going to solve the problem of data quality. Second, don't assume that IT will fix the problem. It's not that they won't do it, it's that they can't do it. Third, you can spend a ton of money on data cleansing initiatives, and I'm sure many of you here today are involved with that. And yes, you can improve existing data, but here's the big problem. The repairs won't fix anything going forward. So in a year or a month or a week, you'll be right back where you started. So my conclusion from this is that rather than launching a massive initiative to clean up existing data, you should focus on improving the way new data is created and take it from there and expand with a new approach. So again, my job today is to sort of get you outside the data silo and to think about the broader picture of knowledge in the organization and how data plays into that. So let's stand way back and put our thinking caps on, take a little broader perspective about things, and ask ourselves, what are we really doing when we create or modify some structured data? In the business world, of course, we're just doing some work. But if you look at it very carefully, this act of creating data, storing it, is quite profound. Think about it this way. Creating data represents a message to people in the future. Now, they may only be seconds or milliseconds away, but they could be hours, weeks, months, years away. In other words, and this is sort of the main point that I want to emphasize today, the act of creating data is the act of sending a message. Now, we usually don't think about it that way, but that's exactly what's happening. So what's distinct about creating data as an act of business communication is that you're almost certainly not going to be face to face with the recipients of the message or connected live with them via an interactive network. So that rules out body language, raised eyebrows, emoticons, as well as dialogue, including grunts and groans, ugh. To clarify what you mean, you will be having no conversation with the recipients of your messages. So in the end, and in that sense, the message that you send when you create data is blind. It's a message in a bottle. You don't know necessarily who's going to read it and for what purpose and when they're going to read it. So as a consequence, the data a worker creates literally needs to speak for itself. It needs to explain itself. It needs to carry its own context. Quality in this sense means focusing on making the intended meaning of the message clear. Just formatting the data correctly and validating that according to syntax is not going to get you anywhere close to that goal. If the intended message isn't clear, the message will never be properly understood. So let's think about it. Put yourself in the position of being on the receiving end of blind messages, data that was created in the past, and you're looking at it now. What should the recipients of blind messages expect? Well, you've got the right to expect several things in terms of quality. First, you have the right to expect high quality evidence about what the content means. Second, you have the right to expect that you do not need to make any significant assumptions to supplement that evidence, especially in terms of what the data means. And third, you have the right to expect that the content represents exactly the reality that the evidence in front of you suggests that it does. Now, what kinds of evidence should be available to recipients of blind messages? Well, there are at least these four kinds that should accompany or be available to people sending and receiving blind messages. And they are labels and names, including codes, definitions, concept model, business rules. Those are the four big things that are really going to clarify the meaning of what you intend. Those are really the only thing that establishes context, because you won't be having a conversation to clarify context. I'll even go so far as to say this. Ultimately, data quality isn't really about the quality of your data. It's about the quality of your business vocabulary and business rules. And plain and simple, that's the starting point of quality. Now, because of the time delay, again, we're standing back and sort of looking and painting this broader picture. In delivering blind messages to everyone in the future who might need them, what you need is a secure, well-organized holding area for the data. And this, of course, is why IT professionals and data architects like yourself create data system architectures. In other words, a data system architecture is essentially a rest stop for those business messages getting translated on a delayed basis to people in the future. Now let's talk about most data quality measures currently in use. What they do is they focus on the content of that data system architecture, not on the quality of the original business messages. And that misses the mark almost entirely in clarifying what practices produce good business messages in the first place. Now, you look at this table. These are some typical data quality measures. Very well done, very nicely sourced. And, insofar as they go, I don't argue with them. So data quality measures, those kind of tossed around in the professional space, generally talk about completeness and uniqueness and timeliness and validity and accuracy and consistency. And that's all well and good, can't argue with that. But let me ask you this. Where in that list does it say anywhere that the message the data represents has to be understandable? Wouldn't you think that might be important? And how about meaningful instead of just complete? To put the matter as simply as possible here, the quality of the data in a data system architecture can never be any better than the quality of the business messages that produced it. Stored data is simply the residue of things that have already happened in the business, of work that's already been completed. And once it's done, in many respects, it's too late to clean it up. Now, here's another observation, and to continue this point about data quality measures currently in use, is that they're mostly quantitative. And you can see for yourself in the last two columns over there, in what sense they're quantitative. But think about that. Do quantitative measures really make sense to you in terms of assessing the quality of the messages that you get? Now, sure, you can do all sorts of math things to data. And like Dilbert is saying here, what do those math things that you can do today actually mean? And more importantly, do they mean anything going forward? So let's inject some common sense here. You do not have data quality. You do not have high data quality if you have to ask an IT person or a data architect what some data means. If it doesn't speak for itself, then the battle is already lost. You also don't have high data quality if the names used for the data are cryptic, the definitions are missing or uninformative, and the data values are not of the kind that you would expect intuitively. So what I want to do with you today is to refocus and redirect our whole conversation about data quality. I want to get outside the data silo, box professionally, and look at the bigger questions involved here. So I recently introduced some common sense dimensions of what I like to call communication clarity for business messages. And that's exactly, again, what data is about. They are business messages to people in the future. So I would identify 4 of those dimensions, and those are what I want to talk about today. The messages, the data should be readable, it should be understandable, it should be precise, and it should be reliable. Now, these 4 criteria are proactive with respect to data quality, not implicitly retroactive, backward looking, like the data quality dimensions that I mentioned a moment ago. And by the way, they apply to both structured and unstructured data. I'll get to that in just a minute. The 4 criteria seem largely self-evident, but as you can imagine, there's much more here than initially meets the eye. I'll briefly discuss each of these 4 dimensions of communication clarity individually in just a moment. But before we get there, again, broadening our perspective, let me make another observation. In a lot of people's minds today, maybe in yours too, we'd have to have that conversation, the world of so-called unstructured data and structured data are perceived as altogether separate and distinct, completely apart from each other. There's no real connection whatsoever to one another. Now, I want to challenge that notion fundamentally. Why? Because the very same problems in each case actually spring from the very same sources. So to start with, let me point out that the term unstructured data, and usually what we mean by that is text in the form, as I'm showing here, like commands, command to Alexa, turn off the lights, or business rules, which is our main focus, textual sentences, you know, the to start out with that discussion, I want to point out that this quote unquote unstructured data, the term is highly biased, and I'm sure the person who came up with the term unstructured data came from IT or maybe Silicon Valley. I mean, who really thinks about commands and sentences and business rules and paragraphs of formal business communications as data? I mean, unless you're in Silicon Valley, that's sort of a reach. It's a very big reach. And so unstructured data really isn't unstructured at all. I mean, have you ever heard of that little thing called grammar? Of course it has structure. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is use the term messages, and I'm also going to use it for unstructured data equally as for structured data. But let's look even a little deeper. And that has to do with our view of so-called structured data. Example on the right there, a table, a matrix, relational table, whatever, so-called structured data. Let me see if I can draw out the problem there. Structured data, such as it's laid out in that table, just some sample rows of data here. is really just repetitive messages that have been stripped bare of almost all grammatical conventions. And that's a problem. It eliminates and reduces semantics, and that's just is not a good thing when it comes to communication. So to repeat, when I use the term messages in this presentation, I'm referring to all kinds of textual communications that occur in businesses, including structured data. The 4 dimensions of communication clarity that we'll go over apply equally to all forms of textual messages. Okay, having said that now, and with that broader perspective and framework on our discussion, let's look through these 4 dimensions more carefully. The first is what I call reliability, of readability. A readable message is one that's not unintentionally encoded or cryptic. That is, it's one whose message is not obscured by the choice of signifiers, whether that means names or codes. If a message is encrypted, these days security demands that, of course, the encryption should be on top of the message, not an accidental byproduct of forming the message itself. Now, let me take a few simple examples of what I mean by readability, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, and you probably have better examples that you could even use. But of course, cryptic names and codes are rampant in IT systems, and they're encouraged by programming language and software platforms and legacy computer tradecraft. Here's a first example. Who but programmers would know what PID RAD2 type means? I got no clue. So it's cryptic. Why would we do that? Here's the second example. Now, I'm going to hope that you won't do that. Probably a lot of our audience is younger than I am, but that is something like using 0 to mean no and 1 to mean yes. Hey, in natural language, we say no and yes, or true and false. We don't say 1 and 0. But again, those of you who are younger probably aren't making those kind of mistakes these days. Hopefully not. Here's another sort of amusing example of readability. Naming things wrong or obscurely to send the wrong message, and that way you misconstrue the message. For example, how much do you think that 99-cent toast would cost? Well, you might be wrong, and I have an example of that here. You can go out to the big city diner ward in Honolulu, and you may find out that 99 cents actually cost $1.59. Well, that's just plain wrong. So the best practice here, and of course there are lots of best practices for naming things, is never name things after properties that could change with some reasonable degree of certainty. If you paint your room orange and you call it the orange room, and later on you decide to call it blue or paint it blue, you're sort of going to confuse a lot of your visitors. All right, the next dimension of communication clarity is understandability. And what that means is that you only use standard terms with solid business definitions, not data definitions. Now, I get on my soapbox here a little bit, but I'm afraid that a lot of people in the data community really just don't know how to create good business definitions. We're not born with that skill. It's something that has to be crafted, and it has to be worked out with the actual business people who are going to be using the data. A data definition is not going to substitute for a business definition. So failings in this regard can arise in a wide variety of circumstances. Let's look at a couple of examples here in that regard. Actually, the examples are quite relevant to our current terms. Understandably, in immunology, Suppose someone calls something a site. Now, does that refer to a location on your body where a vaccination is injected? Or does it refer to a location where vaccination takes place, for example, at a doctor's office or a drive-through these days? We need standard business terms that are clear about their intended reference and then also have good definitions. And here's another example of understandability. And suppose someone says vaccination, and we've been hearing obviously a lot about vaccinations over the last 2 years. Now, actually, that term, especially if you're into the knowledge of the space, the expertise of the immunology space, that either could refer to a whole series of individual vaccines, like Pfizer and Moderna require multiple doses, or it could refer to any one specific injection of a one dose vaccine, possibly in a series. And you don't realize it, but when you don't use the term precisely, especially in writing and especially in formal communication and in creating data, you're going to cause communication problems. You're going to cause disconnects. So standard terms, standard business terms, obviously very important. And yes, by the way, the CDC, and yes, I do mean that CDC, is one of our clients. So we've had a lot of exposure to these issues over the last couple of years. The third dimension of communication clarity is precision. There's so many ways we can be imprecise in our messages, whether textual sentences or business rules or data. You can be imprecise by using the wrong term for a concept. You can be imprecise by using the term wrong. You can be imprecise by using the same term inconsistently, sometimes meaning one thing, sometimes another. And that's why you need what we call a concept model. And you need to adhere to it faithfully. So, what exactly do I mean when I say a concept model? What I don't mean is a data model. And I don't mean a conceptual data model. I don't even know what conceptual data is. Some of you may have a strong reaction to that. But what I do mean by a concept model, apart from the whole data profession, is literally a vocabulary model, a business vocabulary model that explores and reveals the inherent structure and meaning of the words that we use to convey business knowledge. I wrote a book about this about 2 years ago, business knowledge blueprints. And I really strongly believe that for all sorts of knowledge initiatives, not just data design, but improving formal business communication and text statements and policies and rules, we need a blueprint to go by in that respect. So, digging a little deeper, a concept model is actually a technique to help you think clearly and then put precise words on what it is you're thinking in your head. It is not about describing things in the world, the real world. That's what data models typically try to orient themselves. I'm not going that far. There's some philosophical issues there, but I won't go there. I'm content with trying to decipher what people mean when they use the words that they mean and bring some rectification to those words. Now, the blueprint, the structures that you can produce in concept models can be fairly elaborate because, after all, terminology and the basic knowledge of a space gets to be quite complex. And until you lay that out and have a blueprint for it, of course, you're going to have problem communicating the complexity of knowledge. Now here's a sample. This was from one of our railroading clients. And as it looks like, yes, this is a hierarchy, a deep hierarchy, but really what it is a multi-layer categorization of all the assets you could find in the railroading environment. And I want to sort of walk you through this very briefly, but what I want to do, the way I want to do that is by looking at the definitions. A concept model really is a set of business definitions for the concepts you have in your head, for the things you talk about in the real world. So down at the bottom left, you see some definitions of the terms, some of the terms, a subset of the terms used in this hierarchy. The first term is maintenance of way. And the definition that's given there says a rolling stock used to support the maintenance of the railroad. And what I want you to notice is if you go up one layer, you follow that heavy dark line up one layer in the model, the superior term, the larger term, is rolling stock. So maintenance of way is a variation or kind of rolling stock. Work that right into the definitions. All right, so what's a rolling stock? Well, it turns out a rolling stock is a movable asset that has rail wheels. Okay, so you see rolling stock in the diagram. You go one level up from that and you see equipment. And a synonym of equipment that this railroading company used is movable asset. So you see how I'm working this structure right into definitions. These definitions are not random. They are very carefully crafted in order to bring substance and structure to the meaning of what we talk about. Equipment or movable asset, that's an asset. Now, with asset, you can see at the top of the structure, you're at the highest level of the hierarchy. An asset is just something of value utilized in support of railroad operations. And as you see under asset, excuse me, there are several different kinds of assets depending on their capacity to move, fixed asset, equipment, and detector. Now this concept model completely devoid of business, of technical terminology, of data modeling terminology. It's just a vocabulary model. Very powerful tool though. Now another thing that differentiates concept models is the use of relations between the noun concepts that are labeled with verbs. And you can see a number of those laid out here because think about it. If you're going to talk about the business knowledge of your organization, if you are going to create sentences that express complete thoughts and communicate your knowledge, you are going to require verbs. You can't ignore them. And so how it is we've ended up, with a lot of data modeling approaches that have just stripped the world of verbs it may work for data design or it may not, but it doesn't work for the larger picture outside that data silo box that I talk about of world full of verbs, all that stuff we call unstructured data. Now, it turns out, by the way, that the lack of attention to verbs is a major source of ambiguity in business communication. And that's partly why they are so important. But let me get to that in just a minute. First, let's look at the fourth dimension, which is reliability. And by reliability, what I mean is that the message is consistent with all relevant business rules. So let me give you an example here. Read this statement with me. If ACT-BL LT, probably meaning less than 0, then set the OD-flag to yes. Does that seem like a business rule to you? Is it a statement that business people can understand and communicate and relate to? No, it's not. You can't read it and understand it right off. A colleague of mine working in standards once said, he puts it this way: business people don't set variables and they don't call functions. Don't talk that way. How about this version? An account may be considered overdrawn only if cash withdrawal is greater than the current balance of the account. Well, yeah, I can read that. It communicates. I understand it, assuming I have definitions for those words, and that is a business rule. So we don't want business rules to be technical unless it's in the technology or the special knowledge space of the organization. We want them readable in words that we can understand and we can apply in validating business information. Excuse me. So I read this statement once, and so I have to get on my soapbox here a little bit. I just disagree with this statement strongly. Business rules are not data or system rules. And this statement says business rules shape accurate data values. Well, no. Business rules are about running the business correctly. They are about the guardrails of applying business knowledge in business activity so you don't have accidents, so you stay on safe paths, so you do the right thing, so you have consistent results for customers. Now, only in the sense that business rules shape business behavior and that the business behavior is then correct and aligned with business practices, then is the data correct and aligned with business practices? You can't just apply business rules to data and expect that that's going to solve all your problems. No. Business rules are about business practices. The business practices result in data, and then the data either is or isn't correct according to the business practices. That's always been what business rules are about. There's been a lot of misdirection, a lot of miscommunication in the industry about business rules. Hopefully you can walk away from this presentation today being a little bit more clear about that. So I always like to define my terms. Here are some terms or some definitions for those terms. You can look at them in your own time. Now, let me spend a little bit of time on this example because I think it's worth the effort in a couple of regards. First, I made the point that it's the lack of attention to verbs in business that cause ambiguity. I want to explain that, also provide a little bit more motivation for concept models and why it focuses on verbs. And again, to pull your attention away from just the noun things that we typically look at in data designs into the larger problem of communicating business knowledge, both unstructured and structured data. So this is a mortgage client of ours, and they had a business rule. Income must be greater than 20% of the estimated value if subject to litigation. Now read that to yourself a couple of times and you'll probably think, wow, that's pretty clear. I got that. Not really. The more you poke around on it, the more you're going to find that it is highly ambiguous. And let me just point out in passing some of the ways in which it's ambiguous. First of all, which income are we talking about? Turns out there are two incomes, and they could be talking about either one. And which is subject to litigation, because either the party or the property can be subject to litigation. And those are sort of the simple ambiguities. Let's get to the more complex ambiguities. So when we talk about the connection between income and estimated value, are we talking about the income and estimated value of the property, Okay, in which case we don't really need verbs for that. But we could be talking about the income of the party who owns the property. Or we could be talking about the income of the party who leases the property. Or we could be talking about the income of the party of the the income of the party who completes the loan application that lists the property as collateral. Or we could be talking about, and this is the fifth and final possible resolution of the ambiguity, we could be talking about the income of the party who completes the loan application requesting financing for the party, for the property. Any of those interpretations could be defended. Now you may say, "Oh, well, just common sense tells you it's got to be the last one." No, it really doesn't. And I can tell you from the client, from working with the client, this was a source of huge confusion. So here the ambiguity lies in the verbs and the lack of attention to those verbs, as opposed to just nouns. So what do you need to do? In order to write a clear business communication, in this case, we're talking about quote unquote unstructured data, you need to include the right verb concepts in the sentence. So you need to rewrite the sentence. It's a little wordier, but at least it's correct. And it should say something like, the income of the party who completes the loan application requesting financing for a property, that's the connection that we're talking about, must be greater than 20% of the estimated value of the property if the property is subject to litigation. So that's the property that we mean. Now we have disambiguated. There's almost no chance, little chance, that someone, assuming we have definitions, good definitions, that someone could misread that and misinterpret and get an ambiguous uh, interpretation. Now, I could spend a lot more time on how concept models work and what they do. One of the things that they do is introduce role names so that you can be even more precise about your business terminology. Don't have time to talk about that, but if it's here in the notes, you can take a look at it. But because a lot of times we don't mean, when we say a noun concept, we don't mean all of those noun concepts. We just mean some of them. So, for example, it makes sense to say an applicant must have a current credit score. It would not make sense to say a party must have a current credit score. So, what is an applicant? Well, in this concept model, an applicant is a party who has completed a loan application. You can see there on the left. You haven't completed a loan application, you aren't an applicant. So we can get real precision by drilling down on the terminology. Okay, so what have I done? I've introduced 4 dimensions of communication clarity, which I think are just really common sense. Unfortunately, in our haste to get to data and data design and data quality, we've been overlooking the bigger picture. We've been in the data silo of a profession. We haven't looked outside that at all the business messages in our organizations and how some of those, many of them, end up in one way or another as data. And in the knowledge age, we just simply can't afford to do that any longer. We need to look more broadly. So my message to you today is that by taking the appropriate steps to ensure communication clarity, a great many of the data quality problems that you're probably having will simply take care of themselves. And how do you get there? Well, concept models and business rules are the ticket. Now, business knowledge, of course, is exceedingly complex. And there's no shying away with it. That's part of why data models get so complex. But until you can express it clearly and have a blueprint for it, you're doomed to a world of miscommunication and misinterpretation. And yes, ultimately, poor data quality. Let me put it to you this way. You can't expect customers and software developers to make up for what you yourself can't communicate clearly. And think about that. Customers and software developers are not going to be able to compensate for what you yourself can't communicate clearly. Now, I'm talking to you mostly as data professionals because is there any better choice to expand our view to the larger picture of business knowledge blueprinting and messaging, and take on the larger question of clarity and disambiguation? No, we're it. We're what the company's got for the most part. So I would encourage you to step up to that role and to think about it as part of your broader mission in the organization. There are just unbelievable opportunities, and we're going to see more and more of those opportunities going forward. So I don't know, Christian, if I'm allowed one little small commercial plug, but I'll do it anyway. We do offer self-paced online training about this. There's the URL. There's a free sample lesson actually up on the website now about ambiguity. I'd encourage you to take a look, and I'd also encourage you to have a look at my social media post, connect with me there. Google those books on Amazon. And thank you for sharing this time with me today.